I had always been a bit of a thinker. In fact, I often prided myself on being thoughtful, careful, and considerate. But lately, I had begun to realize that my thinking was becoming a problem. I was thinking too much, overthinking, and it was driving me crazy. It all started with something small, as many things do. I was working on a project at work. It was a task I had done before, and it seemed straightforward enough. But for some reason, as I began to work on it, I couldn't stop thinking about every detail. I worried that I might miss something important, that I wasn't doing it perfectly, that I might make a mistake. Each time I made a decision, I would second guess myself. Should I send this email now, or should I wait for more information? Was I being too quick in making that decision? Could I be missing something crucial? The more I thought, the more anxious I became. My thoughts seemed to multiply like a web, weaving themselves into every corner of my mind. I couldn't focus on the task at hand because I was trapped in a cycle of worry and doubt. This was just the beginning. Over the next few days, my overthinking began to spill over into other areas of my life. It wasn't just work anymore. I started overthinking things in my personal life too. Every conversation I had, every plan I made, every choice I needed to make. Suddenly, I was questioning everything. I would replay past conversations over and over in my head, wondering if I had said the wrong thing or if I had upset someone without realizing it. Even when I was trying to relax, my mind wouldn't let me. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about things I had said or done earlier in the day. Should I have spoken up in that meeting? What if I came across as too harsh? What if my friend thought I was ignoring them because I didn't respond to their text message immediately? The thoughts kept coming, faster and faster, and I couldn't escape them. I could feel myself sinking deeper into this cycle of overthinking. It was exhausting. Every decision, no matter how small, felt like a huge, overwhelming task. I was tired of constantly questioning myself, tired of living in a world of what ifs. One day, I realized that I couldn't keep going like this. I had to do something. I couldn't keep spiraling into this mental chaos, letting every thought take control of my life. But the question was, how? The first step was admitting that I had a problem. It was hard to accept that my tendency to overthink was affecting my life so negatively. I had always thought that overthinking was a sign of intelligence, that it was better to analyze everything carefully than to act without thinking. But now I could see how it was holding me back. My constant analysis was preventing me from taking action, from making decisions, and from enjoying life. I began to research overthinking, hoping to find a way out of this mental maze. I learned that overthinking is often a result of anxiety. It's when our minds become overwhelmed with doubt, fear, and uncertainty, causing us to get stuck in a loop of overanalysis. It's easy to think that by thinking more, we can solve problems. But in reality, overthinking often leads to more confusion and stress. I also learned that overthinking is a habit. Like any habit, it can be broken, but it takes time, patience, and practice. I didn't expect to fix it overnight, but I knew I had to start somewhere. The first thing I did was try to focus on the present moment. My mind was constantly racing, jumping from one worry to the next. I realized that I was spending so much time thinking about the past or the future that I wasn't paying attention to what was happening right in front of me. I decided to try mindfulness. I had heard about mindfulness before, but I never really understood it. It seemed like something that only people who were naturally calm and peaceful could do, but I was desperate for a solution, so I decided to give it a try. I began by taking deep breaths. I would stop what I was doing for a few minutes and focus on my breath, paying attention to the sensation of the air entering and leaving my body. At first, it felt strange. My mind would wander, and I would get frustrated, but I kept trying. Slowly, I started to feel a sense of calm wash over me. As I practiced mindfulness more often, I began to notice small changes. I wasn't overthinking as much during the day. When my mind would start to spiral, I would pause and take a deep breath. I would bring myself back to the present moment, focusing on the task at hand instead of getting lost into my thoughts. It wasn't always easy, and I still had moments where I felt overwhelmed, but I was beginning to see that I didn't have to let my thoughts control me. Another thing I realized was that I needed to accept that I couldn't control everything. A big part of overthinking comes from a fear of uncertainty. We want to know what will happen, how things will turn out, and what the right choice is. But the truth is, life is full of uncertainty. There's no way to know exactly how things will go, no matter how much we think about them. I began to practice letting go of the need for control. Instead of trying to figure everything out, I started to trust that things would work out on their own. I would make a decision, and then I would move on. If I made a mistake, it was okay. I would learn from it and keep going. There was no need to keep second-guessing myself. As I worked on these things, I began to feel a shift. My thoughts were still there, but they didn't have the same power over me. I was learning to observe my thoughts without getting caught up in them. I wasn't perfect, and there were still days when I struggled, but I was beginning to see that I didn't have to overthink everything. One of the most important things I learned was that overthinking often comes from a place of fear. Fear of making the wrong choice, fear of failure, fear of disappointing others. But I realized that fear is a part of life. It's normal to feel uncertain or afraid at times. The key is not to let that fear control you. I had started the journey to stop overthinking, but I knew that it would take time and practice. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I was no longer letting my thoughts control my life. I was learning how to live in the present, trust myself, and let go of the need for perfection, and that was the first step toward finding peace. As the days passed, I realized that breaking the cycle of overthinking was not going to be as simple as just thinking less. Overthinking had become a part of my routine, and it was hard to stop something that had been ingrained in my mind for so long. But I was committed to making a change. I knew it wasn't going to happen overnight, but I could feel myself taking small steps forward, and that was enough to keep me going. The more I practiced mindfulness, the more I understood how important it was to bring my focus back to the present moment. I began taking breaks throughout the day to check in with myself. Whenever I felt my thoughts starting to spiral, I would pause and take a few deep breaths. At first, these moments felt unnatural, but gradually I started to notice a shift. My thoughts weren't as loud, and they didn't demand my attention as much as they used to. One thing that helped me even more was setting small, achievable goals for myself. Instead of focusing on everything that could go wrong or all the things I had to do, I started breaking tasks into smaller pieces. For example, instead of looking at a big project and thinking, I don't know where to start, I would think, what's the first thing I need to do? And then I would focus on just that one step. This helped me stay focused on the task at hand without getting overwhelmed by everything else. At first, this felt like a small victory, but the more I applied this approach, the more confident I became. I found that breaking things down into manageable chunks helped reduce my anxiety. It took away the pressure of having to do everything perfectly and helped me realize that it was okay to take things one step at a time. Another powerful technique I tried was journaling. I had never been someone who wrote down my thoughts before, but I decided to give it a try as a way to clear my mind. I set aside a few minutes every evening to write down whatever was on my mind. At first, it felt strange to write about my worries, but it helped me organize my thoughts and get them out of my head. I would write about what had happened during the day, what I was feeling, and any thoughts that were causing me stress. As I wrote, I began to notice patterns in my thinking. I would often overthink situations that hadn't even happened yet. For example, I would imagine conversations with people that hadn't taken place, worrying about how they might respond or what I might say wrong. But when I read back what I wrote, I realized that these conversations were just fears in my mind, nothing more. Writing them down helped me see how much energy I was spending on imagined problems. Over time, I became less consumed by my thoughts. I still had moments of doubt, but I began to question my tendency to overthink. I started asking myself, is this something I can control right now? Is this helping me in any way? The answer was often no. In those moments, I would take a step back and remind myself to focus on what was truly important. I also started practicing gratitude, something I had never really thought about before. Each day, I would make a list of things I was thankful for. They didn't have to be big things, just small moments of happiness or things I appreciated in my life. Sometimes it was the warmth of the sun on my face, or a nice conversation I had with a friend. Other times, it was simply the fact that I had a roof over my head and food to eat. This practice of gratitude helped me shift my mindset. Instead of focusing on the things I feared or the problems I hadn't solved yet, I started to focus on what was already going well in my life. It reminded me that I had a lot to be thankful for, even when things felt uncertain. The more I practiced these techniques, the easier it became to let go of the constant need to control every detail of my life. Overthinking had always been a way for me to feel like I was in control, but I began to understand that overthinking was not helping me make better decisions. It was just making everything harder. I realized that trusting myself and letting things unfold naturally was far more powerful than trying to predict every possible outcome. However, this shift didn't happen overnight. There were still days when I found myself slipping back into old habits. I would catch myself overanalyzing something or getting stuck in my head again. On those days, I would remind myself that it was okay. Change takes time, and I was learning to be patient with myself. I didn't expect to stop overthinking completely, but I was determined to keep making progress. One of the biggest challenges I faced was learning to let go of perfectionism. I had always believed that if I thought long enough and hard enough about something, I could find the perfect solution or make the perfect decision. But I was beginning to realize that perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was to move forward, even if it wasn't perfect. I had to accept that making mistakes was part of the process and that I could learn and grow from them. I had learned to embrace imperfection, not as something to be feared, but as a natural part of life. When I accepted that, I found that I was less anxious about making decisions. I no longer needed to be certain about every choice I made. I could trust myself, take action, and adjust along the way. One afternoon, while sitting in a cafe and reflecting on how far I had come, I realized that I had made more progress than I had given myself credit for. I was no longer spending hours worrying about everything. I was learning to live in the moment, trust my instincts, and let go of the need to control everything. And while I still had work to do, I was starting to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I knew that I wasn't done with this journey. Overthinking still crept in sometimes, and there were moments when I would feel overwhelmed. But now, I had the tools to recognize it and take action. I had learned to stop overthinking, not by fighting it, but by choosing to focus on what I could control and letting go of the rest. As I walked out of the cafe that day, I felt lighter. My mind was no longer a constant storm of thoughts, but a calm, steady rhythm. And for the first time in a long time, I felt confident that I was moving in the right direction. I was learning to stop overthinking, and it was starting to feel like freedom. As I continued on my journey to stop overthinking, I began to see the real transformation that had taken place in my life. The changes weren't just about learning to manage my thoughts better, they were about gaining a new perspective on life. I was slowly learning to trust myself, my decisions, and the process of living without the constant need to predict every possible outcome. One of the most important lessons I had learned was the importance of self-compassion. Overthinking often came from a place of self-doubt, as I was constantly second-guessing myself. I would question if I was making the right choices or if I was doing enough. But through my practices of mindfulness and gratitude, I started to see that it was okay to make mistakes. I didn't have to be perfect, and I didn't need to have all the answers. I was allowed to be human, and that meant accepting my imperfections without judgment. I also realized that overthinking wasn't just about worry, it was about a fear of change. I had been afraid to make decisions because I wasn't sure how they would affect me or the people around me. I was afraid that I would make the wrong choice, and that would lead to failure or disappointment. But what I began to understand is that there is no wrong choice. Every decision is an opportunity to learn and grow. Whether it turned out the way I expected or not, I could learn from the experience and use that knowledge to make better choices in the future. The more I let go of the need to control every situation, the more I began to embrace uncertainty. Life is unpredictable, and that's what makes it exciting. I had spent so much time trying to anticipate what would happen next, but now I was learning to trust the flow of life. I was learning that I didn't have to know everything. I didn't have to control every detail. Instead, I could focus on the present moment and take each day as it comes. This mindset shift wasn't always easy, though. There were still days when the old habits crept in. There were times when I found myself slipping back into overthinking, especially during stressful situations. But now, I knew how to handle it. When those thoughts began to spiral, I reminded myself that they weren't helping me. I paused, took a few deep breaths, and focused on what I could do right now. I knew that worrying about the future wouldn't change anything. It would only make things harder. One day, I faced a situation that tested my progress. I had to make a decision about a new job opportunity. On paper, it seemed perfect. It was a great position with more responsibility and higher pay. But as soon as I received the offer, my mind started racing. Was it the right move? Would I be able to handle the stress? Would I disappoint my current team? What if I didn't fit in at the new company? I could feel the familiar spiral of overthinking starting again, but this time I stopped myself. Instead of thinking about every possible scenario and worrying about the future, I focused on the present moment. I took a deep breath and asked myself, what do I want right now? The answer was clear. I wanted to take the leap and grow. I knew that no decision would be perfect, and there would always be uncertainties, but I also knew that I had the skills and the confidence to handle whatever came my way. I made the decision to accept the job, and it was a huge weight off my shoulders. I felt empowered. I realized that the fear of making a mistake had been holding me back all along, and by letting go of that fear, I was able to move forwards. That experience taught me another valuable lesson. Sometimes, the hardest part of stopping overthinking is trusting yourself. When you start to believe that you can handle whatever comes your way, the need to overthink begins to fade. I had learned to trust myself more than I ever had before. I didn't have to know everything, and I didn't have to have all the answers. I could make decisions based on what felt right at the time and trust that I would figure things out as I went along. Over the following weeks, I continued to apply what I had learned, whether it was at work, in my relationships, or in my personal life. I started to feel more at peace. I no longer found myself trapped in a constant loop of worrying about things I couldn't control. I was more present, more focused, and more relaxed. One of the most surprising things was how much my relationships improved. Before, I had often overthought conversations, worrying about what I had said or what others might think of me. I would replay every detail in my mind, trying to figure out if I had made a mistake. But now, I was able to let go of those worries. I learned to trust that my friends and family cared about me, and they weren't judging every word I said. This allowed me to be more open, more genuine, and more connected with the people around me. I also realized how much time I had wasted by overthinking. There had been so many moments in my life where I had been too focused on the what ifs and the buts to fully enjoy the present. Now, I was able to spend more time enjoying life as it came, without constantly looking over my shoulder. I had learned to appreciate the simple moments, whether it was a beautiful sunset, a cup of coffee in the morning, or a quiet walk in the park. Life wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about experiencing it fully, one moment at a time. As I look back on my journey, I can see how far I've come. The habit of overthinking isn't gone entirely, but I now have the tools to manage it. I know that I can take a step back, breathe, and focus on the present moment when I feel overwhelmed. I've learned that overthinking doesn't have to control me. I am in charge of my thoughts, not the other way around. Most importantly, I've learned that peace isn't about eliminating all uncertainty or controlling every aspect of life. It's about learning to trust yourself, letting go of the need for perfection, and embracing the flow of life as it comes. And that, I have discovered, is the real key to stopping overthinking. Every day is a new opportunity to practice what I've learned. I may not always get it right, but I know I am on the right path. And that's enough.